Okay, everyone's here and ready? Yeah. Okay, you can start recording then, I guess. Just a heads up, I prefer non-verbal POI, so if you have a POI, just raise your hand and I'll try to get to you. Other than that, I will start my time in 3, 2, 1. Hello, my name is Gabriel Lowell. I will be the first affirmation speaker for today's resolution of the U.S. federal government should impose substantial fines on airlines for flights that are delayed more than 2 hours. And this is a policy round, so a proposed plan would be to have a fine of $5 per passenger for flights delayed as it says, flights delayed over 2 hours for reasons other than medical emergencies or extremely unpredicted weather conditions. And this would be enforced by the U.S. federal government, and it would be taken into action 1 year from today. And because this is a policy proposal of the U.S. federal government, the value of this debate should be judged upon is net benefits to United States citizens. And with that, I will get into our first contention, which is simply that of precedent. The USFG already has many similar fines in place for the exact same purpose, and so we should be consistent and we should implement this just as we have in other areas. We need to have consistent enforcement. We already have fines on Amtrak, on various private school buses, and on various other buses throughout the country for the exact same purpose, to reduce lateness so that people do not have to suffer excessive amounts of waiting times and have their plans interrupted and potentially be unable to make it to extremely important appointments. And airlines is no different. Our opponents might try to mention that airlines are private, whereas some of these other institutions are public, but we have fines on various forms of private transportation, such as certain private bus companies as well, because we in the country understand that Americans should not be subject to undue burdens and undue wait times that can be avoided. And our second contention is that simply that this policy promotes equality. Because right now, people who are extremely wealthy are always going to be able to fly more elite, more personalized airlines, or simply fly on a private jet that is going to be far more likely to be on time because those companies want to appease those very wealthy people. But everyone else is stuck with airlines that have absolutely, right now, no incentive to be any more punctual. Because so many airlines right now are often subject to such extreme delays, it's not like they have some other option they can turn to. They have nowhere to go if they have these extreme delays. So if they have some extremely important appointment, if they have to attend a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for an internship, or if they have to attend a family funeral, they are left with no other options because these airlines don't care. And because right now there is no reason for these airlines to care. So the only people who have these advantages are people who are already extremely wealthy. And that's only further promoting extreme inequality in this country. We want to help level the playing field, and we want to have airlines they can count on, and to have airlines that are reliable, and to be able to trust that their appointment, that what they sign up for and what they pay hundreds of dollars for will be consistent, and they can trust it. Again, and our opponents might talk about this being an undue burden on airlines, but most airlines right now, on average, are about 20 minutes late, and we on the government side understand that there are some legitimate reasons for airlines to be late. However, 2 hours late is simply unreasonable, and it can cause severe plans, and it can cause people to miss extremely important appointments, even if they were smart and set aside a certain grace period. That 2 hours blows right through that grace period, and it leaves people stranded, and it leaves people unable to meet these important appointments, these important deadlines. And that could mean the difference between someone getting a job that could decide their career. That could mean the difference between someone making it in time to, say, a college tour if they lead a busy life that could determine where they end up studying. 2 hours can make the difference in so much of a person's life if it is an important appointment. And if they can't count on any modicum of reliability, what are they supposed to do? We're not punishing airlines for small minor inconveniences. Again, the average delay is 20 minutes. We're just making sure that they have to take into consideration the needs of the consumer and the needs of the United States citizens. Airlines, just like every other form of public transportation in this country, should have to take into consideration the people they are serving. They should have to take into consideration these people's needs. They shouldn't be able to just be hours and hours late and hurt so many people's lives and suffer no consequences for this. And some people might argue, and our opponents preemptively might also try to argue that airlines can't necessarily change their policies or work to improve or work to reduce delays so quickly. But that's why we're giving them a grace period of a year. We understand that it will take a certain amount of time to implement these policies that will streamline the airlines and make them more efficient. But we're giving them that time. We're just saying, look, you can't continue. You need to be responsible to the people you are serving. You can't continue to promote this extreme inequality. You can't continue to hurt people. Yes, what is your POI?
I just had a quick clarification. So the plan is only it will exclude unpredictable weather conditions, right?
It will exclude weather, I sort of rephrase that. It will exclude weather conditions that are too hazardous for safe flying, like that it would potentially pose a severe risk of passengers dying, because obviously that would be unacceptable. That wouldn't apply to just like a bit of turbulence that could still be safely flown in.
Cool, thank you.
Yes. And so for all of those reasons, for the reasons that we already have precedent, for the reasons that airlines should not be any different than any of these other forms of transportation, and for the reason that this policy would help promote equality and make sure people's times matter and make sure the needs of United States citizens are being met, I urge a strong vote in favor of affirmation. Thank you.
Order is one disadvantage, then the off top down, which basically just means the negation case, and then I will refute my opponent's case. Minutes. Oh, sorry. Is everyone ready? My time will start now. We negate the resolution that the United States federal government should impose substantial fines for airlines on flights that are delayed more than 2 hours. We will agree with our opponent's definitions and propose that the weighing mechanism is net benefit. Judge, when we break down this res, we need to understand exactly what this res is saying. This res is toying with an entire industry, the airline industry, which has the potential to affect entire countries' economies through things like tourism, as well as many important jobs, which the affirmative themselves talk about. In this sense, we would say that at a time where the airline industry is already at a very, very delicate brink, anything that could upset them would automatically move them into disruption. It doesn't matter how much of a grace period you give them, because we've had a 3-year pandemic and that is arguably still continuing, and airlines are still suffering. 1 year is not enough to solve back for that. So with that being said, let us go into our first disadvantage, which is that of economic disaster. The uniqueness is that in the status quo, airline industries are suffering economically, especially after COVID. There are 2 pieces of evidence for this. The first piece, most US airlines like American, Delta, or United Airlines are extremely dependent on business travelers and the international travelers. They represent the majority of their clientele. The COVID variant have kept businesses from returning to the office, and thus employees from business flights, as well as general international travel restrictions, greatly sinking the airline flight industry. The second piece of evidence, the industry is forecast to make net losses of $52 billion this year, and airlines are forecast to cut costs by 31% in 2021 versus 2019. As traffic recoveries continues, airlines are facing multiple cost pressures. The second argument is that a lot of delays are super unpreventable, such as weather conditions, which yes, the affirmative accounts for, but they also don't account for a lot of other things like bird strikes, which is not part of the weather conditions, but it is merely part of the fact that birds have like really, really irregular migrating patterns that can actually end up leading to a lot of airline delays that can be incredibly substantial. For example, this is literally actually never mind. So yeah, bird strikes are definitely a really, really important example. And secondarily, there are a lot of other things, like for example, like labor shortage issues or supply chain issues in terms of being able to get resources on time, which are not accounted for by the affirmative plan. The most common reasons for flight delays are actually air traffic control restrictions, which are really, really important because air traffic control is a safety concern that makes sure that there aren't too many planes in the same airspace. For example, if a lot of planes are forced to relocate to a really small airport, which is something that happens really commonly, unfortunately, that ends up causing quite a few delays. And those delays inevitably end up leading to a lot of delays that can extend up to days. And those delays are unpreventable, but they are not accounted for by the AF plan because air traffic control simply always has to, the air traffic control simply always has to make sure that the safety of all the airlines is ensured. Also for POIs, if you guys are like raising hands, please like say it verbally because like I'm not looking at this right now. Okay. So and also like also like in terms of bird strikes, on average, there are about 13,000 bird strikes per year in the United States alone. Moreover, we see that the airline industry is a very key part of the economy. Commercial aviation drives 5% of the US GDP, which may seem like nothing, but when you consider how many different things make up the economy and how little they contribute, commercial aviation is much more significant in compared to a lot of those, which is the equivalent of $1.25 trillion in 2022. And then, moreover, we see that this means that we need airlines in order to help the US economy at a struggling time. If the economy is struggling from COVID and airlines are key to solving, then we must have the resources necessary to combat this. Now, the links. When the plan passes, this leads to a lot of loss of investor confidence in the airline industry, specifically because there are substantial fines that will inevitably lead to lots and lots of cost pressures. This is really bad, Judge, because the US airline industry currently employs up to 11.3 million people, and it contributes $1.25 trillion in terms of GDP, which means that if you're incredibly pressuring this already delicate industry with substantial fines that contribute so much to the economy, that means that the US economy will take a massive hit. There's going to be lots of layoffs. People will go into mass poverty, which definitely outweighs the affirmative scenario because the affirmative scenario is just talking about some people not being able to make job interviews on time, which is explainable if you tell your manager that the airline got delayed. They're not going to care if an airline gets delayed. They're going to care if it's something that's preventable. But if people are literally losing their jobs in the airline industry, that's much more important in terms of economy. Moreover, we would say that this also means that prices for flights will increase. We already see that airline ticket prices have spiked by 25% within the last year. And this is because of the fact that there's a lot of stress during COVID and the prices for flights are already rising. So if you're literally making airline industries lose more and more money, they're going to increase their flight prices in order to make up for that, which makes airlines super inaccessible, which probably turns all their offense on equity because they're not making flights more equitable. They're making it very inequitable. The impacts are super simple. First is poverty. And we would say poverty is really, really bad because a lot of people losing jobs is super dehumanizing. It forces people to choose between things like medicine and food and shortens life expectancy by 15 years, especially when you lose a job. Moreover, we would also say that the airline industry contributes a lot to the US GDP. Secondarily, we would say lack of air travel is probably a really, really bad impact because less people are able to travel, which means countries like the Caribbean, which literally rely on tourism, will suffer in terms of economics because less people from the US will be able to travel to these countries. And obviously lack of air travel is super bad because it just contributes to less economic gain. Let's go on to the affirmative case. I want to start on their plan text. How do you define an extremely unpredictable condition? There could be an accident on the roadway. There could be pilots that have religious observances that prevent them from being able to take flights, which means people will have to search for other pilots. These are all conditions that the affirmative plan, I'll take it to the end. These are all conditions that the affirmative plan simply does not account for, which aren't even weather conditions, but they are still super bad. So at this point, either you have a lot of these conditions, So then on their first contention, they talk about how the US already has fines on public transportation. Just public transportation is much different because most people in domestic transportation use cars, which means that the public bus industry or stuff like that isn't nearly as comparable to an industry like airlines, where literally there's so many more people, which means that public transport industries and private transport industry on the road is much, much different from the airline industry. They can't compare these. There's apples and oranges. Let's go to their equality contention. We would say your plan increases flight prices, which makes it much more inequitable. They just talk about private jets, which is 1% 1% of the population. It's so negligible. But we're talking about the fact that more people won't even be able to access air flight prices, which is going to be super, super bad. This customer satisfaction impact is really, really intangible, whereas we give you a tangible impact about how much money is being contributed. And all their arguments about like how people will miss important meetings are super nebulous, because we would say that you can definitely make those excuses. And also, here's a really important argument. Most of the time when people are going for job opportunities, they'll often at least arrive the day before, which means even if the airline delay extends to over a day, oftentimes they get free vouchers to get other airline flights, which means that it solves their offense. Because even if it's true that some people will lose some people will not be able to go by one flight, they can still go by other flights, which is completely fine. So vote neg. Sorry, do you want me to take your POI now? Because like, if it's okay with everyone.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, were you saying that like a pilot or like a flight attendant having a religious holiday would be in a very unpredictable occurrence? They wouldn't know in advance.
Well, it's more like that, like the ability to like be able to account for labor shortages at that time, because like if so many people are missing their like jobs because of a religious tolerance, being able to search for people to make up for the flight attendances is going to be really stressful and definitely takes a lot of time.
Thank you.
Oh, and then also, just for the 11.3 million people, are you talking about like?
I'm really sorry. Only one POI was asked, so I'm assuming only one POI can be taken off time. I'm sorry about that.
I think she asked one, but you were like speaking and you didn't see it.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. But in any case, if we can move on, that'd be better. Sorry.
Okay, no, that's fine. That's fine. Okay. Also, let me know if at any point there's any background noise. My room is by the entrance of my house, so it's kind of. Okay. Hi, my name is Scarlett Carew, and judges, if you're okay with it, I will start with an off-time roadmap. Okay. First, I will start by refuting my opponent's contentions, as well as saying to why our a little bit of misunderstanding within what our opponents have said to our contentions, and then I will say where our contentions still stand. Okay. Sorry, I will start my time in 3, 2, 1. Hi, judges. Once again, thank you for being here. I'm Scarlett Carew, second speaker on negation. So, first and foremost, you guys were ignoring a very quintessential part of our plan. You guys are refuting our contentions as if we will be making it so that they are completely dissolving all profit entirely. However, airlines specifically make about $6 to $11 in profit per person. This is why in our plan, we are implementing a fine of $5 per person that is late. And for these exact reasons, this way, they still have a profit margin and people are being compensated for. And also, you guys continuously mention like extreme cases, and you say how this will lead to a labor shortage, how this will lead, like labor shortages, and then this will lead to economic disaster and economic crises, and then prices will increase. However, these are all extreme cases. What we are doing, why we are allocating these companies to have a 1-year time, is so that they have time to get those labor shortages, so that they have time to employ those people, so that they have time to enforce these plans so that it won't be as detrimental. You guys are refuting our plan as if it's some very extreme, like worst case scenario. You guys are continuously mentioning worst case scenarios and how this will cause people to go into lack of poverty. And then you mentioned the Caribbean and how that will completely dismantle their tourism industry. However, what we are doing is this 1-year grace period is allocating for them to be able to fix all the mistakes, to implement this plan in a way that is beneficial to all with the least amount of risk factor, as the value criterion and net benefits to citizens. This would be, our plan would be helping the most amount of people. our plan would be making sure that not only are the consumers getting their fair share, which is part of our second contention of equality, but also that the airlines have less risk. The airlines still win because they still make their profit margin. It's slightly less, but they still make more. They still make money. They still make profit because the fine is only $5, as well as the consumer won't be as greatly affected. And then once again, they will only lose money rarely. It doesn't always hurt them. It doesn't mean like every flight. Your reputations are insinuating that every single flight they will lose hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that this will lead to economic crisis. This will lead to this, and that. And then it'll lead to poverty and lack of industry, lack of flights, more inflation. However, all of these are immensely extreme examples. What we are doing is just setting a precedent that these companies need to be held accountable and that they can better the consumers, the citizens that are taking these flights. And we mentioned how in our first contention, that they already have fines. And you said that they are very different to this. And that like trains and buses are completely different to flights. However, I'm failing to see the difference as both trains and buses, as well as flights, are helping people get to point A to point B. They are both profiting off of and helping people get to where they need to go. Yes, they have different things, whereas buses and maybe even some train lines are affected by things such as traffic. But so our planes are also by traffic. Trains, for example, also experience delays due to weather. And when they have delays due to weather, they have to still experience those fines. Why is it that we are holding trains or we are holding buses to this account, but we are not holding planes? We're not holding all these aviation companies. We're not holding Delta. We're not holding American Airlines, Alaskan, Frontier, Spirit, whatever you want to, whichever airline. Why aren't we holding them to the same precedent? They all have the same function. So why aren't they having to pay for it? Why aren't they helping the consumer? And then as far as equality goes, to this, you guys refuted that they have nowhere, that we only mentioned private planes, and that internships are like extenuating circumstances. However, sometimes you have things such as funerals. Sometimes people need to be at a certain place by a certain time. And not everyone has the economic freedom to be able to go to another flight. Not all companies will give out a voucher. Companies such as Spirit, for example, you will pay less for this. However, that's because that might be all that you can afford. And Spirit has a boatload of delays. Or you have even like some things with like Delta flights, American Airlines. Maybe you might be able to afford a better ticket. However, why is it that because you can't afford a more expensive ticket from a more reputable airline that is more expensive, or because you can't afford a private plane, why should that mean that you don't get the same experience as other people? Why should that mean that you're not justly compensated for in a way that doesn't even affect the airline industry as much as you guys are implying? Why shouldn't you? Why? Just why? And so therefore your guys' contention of economic disaster, that is like the most like extreme precedent. You guys mentioned all these statistics about 52 billion and that how the industry is bouncing back from COVID, which yes, is true. But once again, our plan implements it in a way that helps the consumer and doesn't affect the industries as greatly as you guys are implying. And then as far as weather conditions, I was a little bit confused on this contention, as I can't tell if I heard bird strikes or Jern strikes. Bird strikes, BIRD. Okay, and
Yeah, bird strike.
Bird strike. What is a? I don't know what a bird strike is.
It's like a literal like bird like colliding with the aircraft.
Yeah,
Oh.
that's what happened with like US-15 H-49. That's why they got held.
Oh, okay. However, you guys mentioned there was what 30,000 of these bird strikes, correct? However, that is a mere 30,000, and also that would fall under our contention as it is leading to a hazardous condition. Because if the bird flies into the window of the cockpit, then they can't see, so they have to make an emergency landing. Therefore, it is an extenuating circumstance. And for all these reasons, I urge a strong vote in favor of negation, of affirmation. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll be the second speaker for the negation. I have 8 minutes, and just as an off-time roadmap, I'll be responding to what they mentioned in their speech. And if I have time, I'll just be going over our case once again. And yeah, so my time starts now. Okay, so judge, they first opened the speech saying that airlines are making $6 to $11 in profit per person, and they are fining $5 per person. If you really think about this, if that's true, you are cutting the profit margin in half or more than half, which is an extreme change, whether they think it is or not. Like what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you aware that our main point, that we would be cutting profit margins in half in this extremely rare edge case that is not the case for most of airlines' profits?
Yes, I'm aware of you're cutting it for flight delays. Okay, I'm continuing. What?
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So they're cutting it in half or more than in half for all flight delays. And as we talked about before, flight delays are very common and is a big issue, as they mentioned, because they're making such a big deal out of flight delays and how people are constantly late. So you're basically so for each flight delay that's over 2 hours, which is extremely common, then they're losing a large majority of their profit, which completely alters their business model. So whether they try and argue that's not a big deal, it completely is, because they're almost losing profit on each delay that they have. And since flight delays are extremely common and flight delays are such a big issue, then this is a big deal, whether it is or whether they say it is or isn't. They said that they're solving this with a 1-year grace period that is allocating for them to be able to fix all their mistakes. So one, they don't define what these mistakes are. Like, as we mentioned before, most of flight delays aren't caused by the airline themselves, and it is caused by other issues, like, for example, weather and air traffic control and bird strikes. So air traffic control is the biggest one, and it's not due to the airline's fault or anything. It's just that there literally can't be this many airplanes in the same airspace. They have to share the airspace, and they have to allocate for that because it's a safety concern to have all these planes taking off. So it's the nature of air travel, and so this 1-year grace period won't fix anything because it takes many years to try and completely change this issue, and it takes the work of all the different airlines to try and collaborate and be more efficient and like make sure they allocate for all their different planes. So this 1-year grace period isn't actually going to solve for anything. The other argument is that we keep using these worst case scenarios. No, these are not worst case scenarios. These are literally as I said before, flight deviations every day, flight delays every day. And this is an extreme change that you guys are making. And it's not this worst case scenario that they make it seem to be. Smaller airports, which cannot have a lot of airlines, simply will never be able to prevent delays because air traffic control there is always super hard and super difficult. And this grace, so even if you were to try to make the airplanes or the airports even bigger, that takes more than a year for all this construction and infrastructure. So they said that it's like this, it's slightly less profit, but they still make profit. But it doesn't matter because we have evidence that flights are being delayed right now because they have lost $50 billion despite making $6 a person. So there's a massive amount of loss that you will induce regardless. The consumer won't be greatly affected is false, because if you're turning and altering the whole industry on its head, then of course the passengers are going to be affected, because flights and like airlines themselves, the nature of air travel is completely changed. So none of these are like extreme examples or worst case scenarios. This is literally what's going to happen when these fines that take place. They say that companies need to be held accountable for their mistakes. Once again, most of the a large majority of these mistakes or these like air delays aren't caused by the airlines. It's not like the crew is like being inefficient or anything. It's literally just the nature of air travel in and of itself, which is why a lot of people, they book a flight for the day before their event or their interview or such, because they're accounting for a flight delay. Because they don't want, because if there's a flight delay that occurs, which can happen, they account for that. So like they keep saying that, like, oh yeah, you're gonna miss your job interview and stuff and whatnot. But most people, they just account for this in general because it's just a part of the status quo that flight delays exist. They said that trains and buses and cars are just like are the same thing, are like comparable in terms of like charging for delays, finding delays. But land travel is entirely different than air travel. So air traffic control, which is the main contributor of these delays, is not part of buses or trains or cars or whatnot, because it's literally air travel versus like going on like a road or like a train track or anything like that. So it's completely different, entirely different, and more like it's more like susceptible to like sort of like this air traffic control delays and stuff, because each flight has like variable paths and like variable flight paths and whatnot. So the air traffic control is entirely different, and it's not at fault of like the airlines or anything. So they're not being held accountable for anything. Also, equitable buses and train fees may be nice on paper, but it's not a realistic argument, because delays on land travel are way different than air travel, as I mentioned before. So like bird strikes, which is another issue, which is the third biggest issue for air delays, that's completely out of their control, and it's not an issue for like trains or cars, but it is an issue for airplanes because they're up in the air, obviously. So they aren't paying because the delays aren't due to the airlines themselves. They mentioned that some companies don't give vouchers for when airlines are delayed. But your plan is to try and remove and get rid of delays. As we mentioned before, it's not going to these fines aren't going to do anything, because the airlines can't change like this the status quo of like bird strikes and like air traffic unless there's like a whole unless the entire like all the airlines collaborate and try and like fix air traffic control or like solve for this and like build bigger airports and such. So like this 1 year grace period won't work, and then so you're not actually solving for these delays. So then the company is not giving vouchers is non-unique. They said that bird strikes are negligible because it's like 30,000. So like
Zane, he has to POI.
Okay, yeah, sorry, PO. Yeah.
You mentioned that people naturally just expect delays of a certain time, and so they account for that. Why can airlines not also just, if they constantly expect these delays, account for that and change the estimated times of arrivals to account for the delay?
Well, airlines account for, they change their estimated arrival if there is a delay. Like, because they're the ones who figure out if there's a bird strike or whatever. So they'll like tell the people, hey, there's a delay. And then like either your flight is canceled or you have to wait. So like that's a thing in the status quo. Okay, yeah, I'll continue. So the last point they made was that bird strikes are negligible. They said it was like 30,000. So our original statistic was 13,000 bird strikes that occur, and the U.S. airlines flew 28,000 flights. So that's literally 13,000 of the 28,000 flights are delayed by bird strikes. So the bird strikes are actually like a big deal, and which is why it's one of the biggest reasons and biggest causes for flight delays. Also, bird strikes aren't weather, so you can't it can't fall under a weather condition, and like it's not an extreme like situation or like an extreme condition, because it's just a part of the status quo where a bird strike occurs, and it's usually not like they need to like emergency crash land or anything. It's just like a bird strike that happens, and it's like it's a part of our world today right now. And so it doesn't fall under their like emergency conditions or whatever, where the thing doesn't get fined. So it borders the line of an unpredictable plan. I'm plus.
Sorry, do you know how much of a delay a bird strike would cause on the overall flight?
No, I don't. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So I'll continue.
For reference, like the bird strike that caused the delay of US 1549 actually ended up leading to I believe like the subsequent flights ended up getting delayed by at least 3 hours.
So yeah, it would be more than 2 hours. Oh yeah, I'll continue my time now. Okay, yeah. So it's an unpredictable plan because at first they say only weather, but then they count bird strikes under this weather due to like an emergency condition or something. So it's an unclear and like unpredictable for how they define like what conditions do not fall under like what is being fined, as my partner mentioned before. So yeah, as I mentioned before, all the air traffic issues, it's still like going to be fined. It doesn't fall under their plan. So like most of these fines are flowing through, and the $5 per passenger fine is a big deal. It's an extreme change in their profit margin if they're literally making $6 to $11 in profit per person. So it's completely upturning like their airlines profits and whatnot from their delays. Okay, yeah, for these reasons, for negation.
Cool. The order is the top of the lens, like it's kind of like the lens that I explained at the beginning, and then it's just going to be like the neg case and the aff case. Okay. Right. Everyone's ready? My time begins now. Overview of the round. If we've proven right now that the status quo is a delicate scenario, you have to vote negative in order to make sure we don't interrupt that balance. Let us revisit the lens that we said at the top of our case. We said that when viewing this res, you have to understand that the airline industry is a very delicate, unpredictable industry that can be very, very prone to change. Also, it's important to look at the resolution because every argument my opponents have made about how these fines aren't really going to do anything because the opponent, the airlines are all making enough money. They're all like, we've already refuted all of that because one, there's so much profit loss, and two, the resolution literally says, as we've said, that the United States federal government should impose substantial fines. Substantial is a big word, Judge. It's not just a word like, oh, we'll impose some fines, because if you are like at this point, it shows you that they themselves aren't even following the resolution correctly. And at that point, it's pretty clear that because we're winning, that this is a substantial change. This isn't just some small change. You have to understand how many implications there are behind the fact that you're interrupting a delicate industry. Quickly on our bird strikes argument, I'm sorry if this was kind of unclear, but functionally the argument is basically like when you look at a lot of airplanes, like the way they navigate, like they have engine turbines that functionally are really prone to like running into obstacles. And one of the biggest obstacles is bird strikes. So like, I'm not sure how many of you watched the movie Sully, but like this is actually a really interesting that happened in that movie. But like it kind of talks about the real life scenario in which half the reason why a nearly fatal crash ended up happening on the US 1549 was because of the fact that bird strikes actually ended up crashing literally into the engine turbines. That's just an example though. So like if you think it's new, that's fine. I'm just explaining how it works. Anyway, so in that case, that really even shows you that also at the point where there are literally 13,000 bird strikes every single year that affect airlines. And we literally see that there are already, as my partner told you, delayed 28,000 flights. But even if you don't buy that, the functional argument, even on bird strikes, doesn't even matter because we also talk about ATC control. The functional argument we tell you here is that when you have smaller airports, for example, they have to often have air traffic control, which makes sure that there are not too many planes on the airspace at one time. And with smaller airports, that unfortunately means that they're going to have some airlines wait way longer, which can lead to hour-long or 2-hour-long delays. And these long delays are actually definitely not under the affirmative plan because they only talk about extreme weather conditions or medical conditions. This is neither of them, which is probably a reason as to why things like this will not be considered by the affirmative plan. But also, I just want to talk about the affirmative plan. It's so unclear what they define as an unpredictable condition. First, they say bird strikes are, first they say only weather conditions, then they say bird strikes are now a part of the plan, and then now they're saying that, oh, okay, well, like we'll account for anything that the airline industry needs to change. Like this plan keeps shifting around. It's not clear, which is a massive reason that you shouldn't be voting for it. Let's go to the disadvantage. Now, on the disadvantage, they keep making this argument that our disadvantage is super nebulous, but we've already responded to this. This is a fact of the matter that the airline industry is very prone to long delays. I'm sure a lot of us have at least experienced one delay that has been quite substantial. It's not like every airline is just going hallelujah. They're just releasing planes at the rate of like 20 planes a second. It is a very massive issue in which there are lots of delays, and we've even proven it with evidence. Where is their evidence? They haven't given you anything about how these types of delays aren't nebulous, and we've given you very clear statistics. Now, on their case, they keep talking about flight delays and equity. The equity equity point is pure idealism because it literally just says, oh, we should treat them as the same. That's cool and all, but you don't even there's so many intricacies behind land travel versus bus travel. Land travel versus air travel. And moreover, there are also on the job interviews point, we've already responded to this with all of our arguments about how people are accepting. They're not going to banish you from the family just because you arrived to a funeral late because of a airline delay, which probably shows you that all their offense is themselves nebulous, whereas the affirmative is the negative is much more believable. But
Okay, I will start my time in 3, 2, 1. So this has been something of a confused debate. So my voters issue speech, I will try to clarify some things and make it very clear why on the ground of this debate, affirmation should win. So first, just to clarify our plan, in case there was any confusion, again, we're saying there would be a fine of $5 per passenger for flights delayed over 2 hours, and the exceptions we gave were unpredictable, devastating weather circumstances, right? Like weather circumstances in the air that are extremely unpredictable and that you had no way of predicting, and emergency medical conditions, obviously. Now, I would like to go into the first big point of class, which is our opponents kept trying to paint this picture of airlines as this extremely fragile organization. And if you touch them, they'll fall over, they'll destroy, and they'll take the economy with them. Except when you simply look at the picture of what we're actually proposing, this argument is nothing but exaggeration and fallacy, because airlines are massive organizations, and the average flight delay is about 20 minutes. We're proposing a fine of about half of their profit margins on this extreme edge case that rarely happens, and that would not devastate the economy. Our opponents keep trying to exaggerate as if this is devastating, but just the simple fact of the matter is it won't hurt airlines that much. All it will do is it will cause them to try to maximize their profit margins by being less late. And how will they be less late? Well, as my partner mentioned, and as I brought up in my POI, and as Negation has not really addressed, there is no reason that if there are constant delays, that these flight companies cannot preemptively extend how long they think the flight will take. If you have a flight that is supposed to take 2 hours, but there's constantly being delays, and so it all generally ends up taking 2.5 hours, well then in their logs, they can just say this is a 2.5 hour flight. And that will eliminate part of the delays, and people will know what to expect. There's no reason they can't do that. You and I can do that. And they're trying to say, no, massive airlines are incompetent. They can't create simple policy changes like that will help people. It would devastate them. They would go broke. And that is simply absurd. And again, our second point of class was that of precedent. We believe that all forms of transportation that serve the American people should be held accountable. And planes, as my partner mentioned, which are less used than other forms of public transportation, should be no different. Whereas our opponents kept trying to paint this picture of planes as this special pet industry that needs government coddling. And if they don't get all this government coddling, and if they don't get this government coddling, they'll collapse. In fact, our opponents even said in their last speech that we have all experienced flight delays, that flight delays are a big problem. They said that, which is part of this debate. Flight delays are a big problem, and our plan is the only one that addresses that. It won't devastate the economy, as I have said, because that is an extreme exaggeration and that misrepresents our case. All it will do is it will encourage these airlines to adjust how long they say the flights will take and to streamline their policies, which again is why we're giving them that 1 year. And it will mean that they will be able to be more on time because there will finally be an incentive, because right now there is no incentive. They have no reason to even try to be on time because customers have no other option than to go to them, which again brings us into the third and final point of class, and that is that of equality, which our opponents tried and failed to minimize, because the fact of the matter is their economic argument doesn't stand, so this is the main thing the debate should be weighed upon. U.S. citizens deserve reliable transportation. Everyone, not just the extremely rich, deserve reliable transportation, and they shouldn't have to worry about, like we talked about, like missing jobs or missing opportunities or not being able to attend a family funeral in the midst of their busy schedules. And our opponents tried to minimize this as if these things that affect the livelihood and happiness of millions of people are unimportant. It doesn't matter. What matters is that airlines should not be denied a single cent because they're these precious children that need to be coddled. That's our opponent's argument. They're saying that a few cents to airlines is more important than equality and more important than giving all of these US citizens free, better, and more equitable access and more reliable access to flight, and therefore promoting equality. So for those reasons, to promote equality for millions, to have consistent policy across our government, and because our opponent's economic policy does not, our opponent's economic argument does not in any way stand, I urge a strong vote in favor of affirmation. Thank you.
That was a really good round, Hal.
Yeah, also.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
honestly,
good round.
I've never heard of bird strike before.
It's a scenario that's somewhat common in like the airline industry, but yeah.
Did you guys know that prior to, or did you guys like find that while you were researching?
Oh, I knew this from before because like I remember watching it. Actually, wait, sorry. If the judges are deliberating, do you want us to like mute or something, or is it okay if we banter on?
You can go ahead. I think.
Okay, cool. Yeah, all right. Yeah. So basically, like, I remember watching a movie about this. Like, basically, the idea is that because there's a lot of like substantial obstacles that airplanes have to operate through, birds, which especially like interact a lot, especially with like the fin flaps on like airline turbines, like they end up having a lot more like ability to like strike into these airline engines, which is like really, really bad because like that's why a lot of the co-pilot's job, for example, in the plane is to monitor the engines, because like if there's even a single risk that engine is basically like going down, it just like contributes to a really, really bad flight path. That's the basic understanding that I had.
Yeah, and then with Soli, I might be like completely wrong, but was that the movie where it's like they had to like land into like the Hudson or something?
Yeah, that was a movie. Yeah, that was a good movie. Anyway, sorry, I have to go right now because like I'm just I got yeah.
So I'm having some trouble submitting it because even though I clicked, oh, you have to have a drop down. Never mind. Okay, I'm clearly doing something wrong here. So
so did you have an issue picking the side of the team?
yes, so I'm picking the side that I consider winning and what I think was the side they were, but it says your winner and your chosen side did not agree. I don't understand what that I mean.
Okay, so because the government team is Lowell and the opposition team is Evergreen.
Yep. And I am pretty sure I'm picking the right combination. And when I submit a ballot, it says your winner and your chosen side did not agree. That just...
I'm ready to submit mine too, so let me see if I get that as well.
I'm also going to probably provide detailed feedback a little bit later. I just want to get the result in.
Yeah, okay, I'm getting the same.
Yeah, so I think the... Oh, because Evergreen is marked as gov in the table above. That's why.
Oh yeah, change that.
Yeah. Okay. So and then speaking position. All right. I think. Okay. Okay, that went through. I don't know why it did that.
Okay, mine went through.
I'm assuming I can go back and provide detailed feedback, or was I supposed to provide feedback before I submitted?
No, you can edit your feedback, I think, till the end of day.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
Oh, wait.
Okay, it seems that all three judges have voted. I think I just need like 20 more seconds to finish up my feedback. So just give me a moment. Okay, I think I'm ready to go. So I think Judge Asim, if you're also ready, and then I think Judge Janet, since she doesn't have a mic, can maybe input feedback just online. Okay, so I think I could get started. So the decision was a 2-1 for the opposition. I can get started. So I voted for the opposition for two reasons. So the first one was I somewhat buy that the status quo is a relatively delicate situation and that the airline industry is at risk for failure, which would have broader economic and social consequences since it accounts for around 5% of the total US GDP. We know the industry is forecasted to make significant net losses. It's already had to cut costs. Like all of this warranting is very helpful and kind of proving that this is a very delicate industry. And the negation points out that this is the most tangible impact in the round, right? We have unemployment, poverty, and broader economic harms that come from that. So then that brings me to my second consideration, which is that will this plan actually push airlines over the edge or just incentivize them to be less late? So for the former, I think it's unlikely that it's going to cause a total collapse, but the negation has a compelling enough argument that it will have a notable impact, which would still be very harmful considering that the industry is in a very fragile state. And I weigh that against the likelihood and the impact of airlines using this as motivation to be less late. But again, the negation makes a pretty compelling argument that there's nothing airlines can do to prevent delays from unforeseeable events like bird strikes, which apparently is a really big deal in the airline industry. So I thought that was very interesting. But again, I just think there's a very low probability that there's actually something airlines can do to prevent these delays. And if so, that they would have done that already. And, you know, they also point out that this doesn't have significant harms to customers, and they do a little bit of defensive work there. I don't fully buy that. I think the affirmation and the government does make some compelling arguments about people missing potential like important meetings, things like that. But again, these are very hard to quantify. It's hard to really make that into a tangible impact. And I think that brings me to really the overall analysis for this debate, which is that there's very little tangible offense from both teams. So for example, it's hard to weigh customer satisfaction or equity in public transportation against any of these other impacts. So more analysis on the impact level would have been a little bit helpful. But, just kind of to sum this up, I would say just some broader notes would be both teams would really benefit from signposting. So knowing which contentions you're extending or refuting is very, very helpful to the judge. That really just helps us because you guys have great line by line argumentation. It can just be a little bit difficult to follow which contention you're doing a line by line on. And I guess the final thing is, of course, congratulations to both teams for making it to the quarterfinals. This is a really great tournament. Both of you teams are very great debaters. So congratulations, Lowell, for making it thus far. And Evergreen, good luck in your next round.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Oh, sorry. I'll let the next judge go.
Yeah, I can go next. So with the caveat, this is the first time I've judged an event like this. I'm going to not be very fluent with all the aspects of it. So I'm purely coming at from a stranger perspective, right? I think, firstly, that was great. It was pretty exciting. Good points on both sides. I did vote for the affirmation, and I think there was pretty much one strong. In addition to the points that Avi made, I think my biggest contention was despite all the data that was presented, despite all the focus on bird strikes, which happen a lot, but don't necessarily delay planes as much, I think that there was never really a direct line drawn between the nature of the incidents and the distribution of the delays. And that for me was a bigger thing. I was less convinced about the argumentation around the fragility of the industry. I mean, this is an industry that has been around since the 1940s and has weathered world wars. So their ability to sort of be resilient and ride out sort of financial impacts like this, is very strong. But I would have been convinced about that if I could be convinced that there was a direct line between the number of more than 2-hour delays that happen on as a percentage basis on that. I do feel that structurally there wasn't too many detailed arguments on the affirmation side. And I think that there was a little bit too much focus on the bird strike on the negation side, which can happen. But I think that that was the crucial aspect for me, that not the what are the reasons for the delays, not the how often they can happen, but what is the frequency of those 2-hour delays and what impact that percentage of delays will have necessarily on the revenue. There was a lot of conversation around what the consequences might be, which was really informative and useful. But without that line connecting the two, it was really difficult to evaluate what is the reality of that thing. So congrats to both teams, but that was it. Thank you.
Thank you.
It seems judge, the final judge has put their feedback into the chat. So with that being said, that was a really, really fun round, and y'all were really nice opponents. So thanks, y'all, and
thank you. Yeah, thank you for judging the debate, guys.
All right. Best of luck. Bye-bye.